Good morning, everybody. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of Cabinet taking place from the Walton Street at the Winchester Guildhall. The time is 9:30 a.m. My name is Councillor Martin Todd, Chairperson of the Cabinet and Leader. I have a few housekeeping points to make before we begin. Please can I advise that the open parts of the meeting are being audio recorded and live streamed from the Council's website. In addition, a video recording of the meeting is being made and will be available publicly shortly after. Please can I remind all participants to speak clearly and remember to use your microphone. In addition, please speak directly into the microphone and do not turn away when speaking. This will ensure your comments are picked up for the audio and video recording, as well as improving the audibility. Please can everyone ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are on silent or switched off entirely. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow any instruction given to you by staff or fire marshals. All fire exits are marked by green exit signs. Please proceed quickly and calmly to the assembly point, which is in Abbey Gardens, and do not use the lift. Can I particularly welcome members of the public to the meeting this morning? When we get to public participation in the agenda, if you would like to come forward to the empty desk in front of you, the microphone is activated by pressing the large button on the base, and as you know, you will have 3 minutes to make your contribution. A timer will appear on screen to show the time remaining. Turning to the agenda, the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I've received 2 apologies for absence from Councillor Paula Ferguson and Councillor Kelsey Lerney. Okay, thank you. The second item on the agenda is membership of Cabinet committees. Fareham Borough Council approved at their executive meeting on the 4th of July the establishment of a Wellborn Community Forum. The terms of reference can be found on the Fareham Council website. Terms offer Winchester City Council 1 seat on the forum. I would like to nominate Councillor Therese Evans for that position, but I don't know if there is another nomination or if the Conservative group wishes to make a nomination.
Chair, yes, thank you. We, I think, already have nominated through Democratic Services Councillor Hugh Lumby. Thank
you very much. So we have a choice Cabinet between Councillor Therese Evans and Councillor Hugh Lumby. Can I see all those in favour of Councillor Therese Evans? Those in favour of Councillor Hugh Lumby. So Councillor Therese Evans is nominated as our representative. We also have space for, well, actually as many deputies as we want, as far as I can tell. So I know that Councillor Angela Clear and Councillor Neil Cutler are interested in being a deputy. Would Councillor Lumby be interested in being a deputy, do you think? Right, well, I propose that all 3 of those councillors are nominated for that position. Agreed? Thank you very much. Next item is disclosures of interest. I need to declare an interest, a personal but non-pecuniary interest, as a member of the County Council, since particularly on station approach, there are a significant number of highways issues involved. Councillor Porter.
Can I declare the same interest, please?
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any other interests that need to be declared by members of Cabinet? Okay, thank you very much indeed. The next item on the agenda is to note any requests from councillors to make representations on an agenda item. I have a request from Councillor Wallace to speak on items 9, 11 and 12. I have a request from Councillor Horrell to speak on items 8, 10, 12, and a request from Councillor Reid to speak on items 9, 11? I'm assuming that you wish to speak at that point in the meeting. The next item, public participation. And again, this is to note the names of people wishing to speak on either general matters affecting the district or on specific agenda items. In this particular case, I have 3 names outstanding. On item 9, I have Imogen Dawson and Chris Higgins, and I'm assuming you would like to speak at that point. I'm sorry, I have on the HRA report, I have 2 names. I have David Light and Ian Tate. Very much. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 22nd of June 2022. Is Cabinet happy to approve those minutes? Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to Leader and Cabinet announcements. I have a brief announcement relating to the area, so the Learney's area. Unfortunately, can't be here today. Back in August 2021, the Council formally and strongly backed the County Council's proposed expression of interest, so-called Mini Holland study for Winchester, looking at how we can improve walking and cycling infrastructure in our city. It was a competitive bid, and in only 19 schemes were approved across the whole of the UK for further work and further study, and Winchester is one of them. We continue as a City Council to strongly support this work through our joint work with Hampshire County Council on the City of Winchester Movement Strategy, and I would like to advise anybody, particularly city residents, who hasn't already done so, to take part in the online survey at cyclefriendlywinchester.commonplace.is. It's important that this is a granular survey that's looking at the details of all the streets, particularly residential areas across the city, and it will more local input that's provided and people commenting on improvements they'd like to see in their local area, the better it will be. Needless to say, we are also, as an administration, strongly supportive of improving walking and cycling infrastructure across the district. That is being handled via the so-called District Local Cycling Walking Infrastructure Plan. But the item I'd like to bring to people's attention is the Cycle Friendly Winchester website. Do we have any other announcements? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Leader. I recently chaired my first meeting of the Winchester Sport and Leisure Park Advisory Group, and in addition to hearing that the centre had welcomed 100,000 people during the last quarter, we also heard about the enormous range of outreach work that Everyone Active carry out on our behalf, and I thought it was just worth mentioning at this meeting some of the work that they do in that regard. First of all, they are working with Lanterns Day Nursery around the special educational needs development provision for the under 5s. They run a rehab pilot programme with the University Hospital of Southampton, offering 4 weeks of exercise classes on a one-to-one basis with a personal trainer for patients having cancer treatment, with the hope that they are more physically healthy before their treatment. They are in the process of developing an outreach programme in priority areas and have written a funding bid to Energise Me, Hampshire's active partnership, to deliver a programme in Stanmore. They are also in discussion with Allegra's Ambition around funding to deliver a programme in Winnell, Week or Hairstock. EA are also working with the Beacon to run a pilot project with them for their service users to access the Winchester Sport and Leisure Park free of charge across the whole week for 6 months. They're working with Southern Health, supporting people with severe mental illnesses to access Winchester Sport and Leisure Park, and specific classes for individuals, such as yoga, boxing, swimming, and the gym. Sporting champions were announced in June with 21 athletes. The Hampshire Talented Athletes Scheme announced in December with 26 athletes, and overall 47 athletes using the centre from a wide range of sports. They are also in discussion with Winchester Gold as to how EA can expand the annual Paralympic personal best event, originally set up by the council to cover other sites in the South region. And they're working with Southampton Football Club on a 6-week summer project. And funding has been received to deliver this for a 6-week project that has now been expanded to 6 months through to December. So not only is this centre continuing to attract large numbers of visitors, and let's hope that continues, it is also doing a lot of work out there in the community to ensure that our sports and leisure park is as inclusive as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Do I have any other announcements? No? Okay. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is item number 8, which is further annual appointments to Cabinet 2022-23. This paper proposes 2 new Cabinet committees to coordinate our work in 2 very high priority areas. Firstly, the creation of a Cabinet Committee housing, which will take a focused look on everything to do with the management of the housing revenue account and our and is intended also to create a space for a better engagement with TACT, which is a particular priority in terms of working on housing-related issues. And the second one is a Cabinet Committee on Regeneration, which will take an overview on all regeneration projects around the city. And it's particularly important that it does take, or around the district rather, it's particularly important that it does take a coherent district-wide view. In the past, we've often gone project by project, but it will be important that this is a committee that looks more broadly than that. The structure that we're looking at, in the nature of the Constitution, if something is set up as a Cabinet Committee, the only voting members of that committee can be members of Cabinet, but we are keen also to ensure that we hear from other voices. And so on the Cabinet Committee for Housing, there will be 2 backbench members from the Liberal Democrats and 2 backbench members from the Conservatives, as well as representatives from TACT. And on the Cabinet Committee on Regeneration, alongside the Cabinet members, there will be 2 backbench members from the Liberal Democrats and 2 from the Conservatives, to ensure that we provide a forum where we can receive reports on key issues relating to regeneration and create a deliberative space to talk them through in public, and create space also for the public to make representation on those issues and hear their points discussed. In terms of the specific recommendations in front of us, the 2 Cabinet members on housing will be the 2 extra Cabinet members on housing. So the chair will be the Cabinet member for Community and Housing, and the 2 other Cabinet members will be the Cabinet member for Finance and Value and the Cabinet member for Service and Service Quality, particularly in the context of their focus on diversity and inclusion. And I'm proposing that in addition to myself as chair of the Regeneration Committee, there'll be 3 members. It says 2 in the paper, but my proposal is 3, having thought about it and the different interests that need to be represented. The cabinet member for the climate emergency, because firstly, it's vital that Regeneration is cognizant of that and is also linked into our work on transport and movement, which sits with the cabinet member for the climate emergency. Cabinet member for community and housing, because again, it's vital that any regeneration work ties closely to our need for affordable housing and is tied into making sure that we're also integrating any new development into the community. And then the cabinet member for business and culture, because all of our regeneration projects also have a strong and important focus on their economic impact on our district as well. So that's what's in front of us. The other recommendations that we have is appointing members to the station approach and Central Winchester Regeneration Open Forums. And I... names there now?
Well, Leader, yes, indeed. And there, obviously, you're going to appoint other members to those 2 CabComs.
Yeah.
And certainly I can assist when we get to any other members.
Right. Let me check my list on that. So I will be asking the Conservatives for their nominations later in the meeting. The 2 backbench Liberal Democrats on the Regeneration Cabinet Committee are proposed to be Chris Edwards and Chris Westwood. The 2 backbench members on the Housing Committee are proposed to be Councillor Angela Clear and Councillor James Batho. It'd be useful to know the Conservative nominations for those committees if you have them. Yeah, if you come forward, I mean, I'll just finish up after those two particular points would be useful to incorporate in the main recommendation. Yeah.
So, Chair, thank you. So for the first open forum committee for Central Winchester, we would like to nominate myself, Councillor Horrell, and Councillor Neil Bolton. For the station approach open forum, we would like to nominate Councillor Stephen Godfrey and Councillor Steve Miller.
Okay.
And for the major regeneration projects, you're looking, I think, 2 from the backbench for us, Councillor Patrick Cunningham and Councillor Stephen Godfrey. And for the Cabinet Housing Committee, we would like to nominate, please, myself, Councillor Horrell, and Councillor Steve Miller.
Okay, and in terms of our nominations for station approach, Councillor Westwood, Councillor Batho, and in terms of regeneration, it'll be Councillor Edwards and Councillor Laming. So that's the full set of nominations. This is all part of wanting to change. I mean, I'll speak more about the Regeneration Committee. This is all about wanting to create space for more deliberation as we run through our regeneration projects. At the moment, we have sort of a gap, as I would see it, between the open forums, which tend to be a sort of public presentation and response type format, and Cabinet, which is a high stakes major decision making committee, and we miss the space to receive reports that relate to the ongoing progress of the committee, of the projects, and a chance to deliberate them and interrogate them in a way that I think will be positive. The intention is that we have a gated project management process for our major projects. So it is still absolutely the case that major decisions, major gateways, business cases and the like will come back to Cabinet, and where necessary, full council. But the intention is that the sort of work in progress on those committees happens in public, happens in a space where that work can be interrogated and discussed in public as well, but it's consciously a deliberative space. So that's the paper in front of you. Those are the proposals I have. Just for clarity, that the Regeneration Committee is referred to in a couple of ways in the paper. Its name is the Cabinet Committee Generation. And that's why I'm putting it forward here today. So next item would be any questions relating to this, and I know that I have only Councillor Horrell who wishes to speak on this. So Councillor Horrell, comments and questions are very welcome.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak this morning on this particular Cabinet paper. And we welcome the re-establishment of Cabinet committees for housing and major projects regeneration, which will present a clear focus for these areas of work. So we're happy to support the initiative. However, could I ask for some clarity based on the report that I have read for this morning's meeting about the Regeneration Committee? What are the criteria that you're using for a project making it onto the remit for that committee? In particular, in the paper, you mentioned CWR and station approach, but I'm not clear why those two. Why, for example, is River Park not included? And 11.6 in the paper indicates a constitutional review is underway, which the Conservative group have indicated their support for, but we've heard nothing about this particular project. And I know our monitoring officer, who is the expert in these matters, is leaving the council. So, Chair, I'm questioning when and how the review will be managed. And the reason why that's important is that in 11.7, it indicates the confusion that may occur as to the correct committees for certain discussions and decisions, particularly as they pertain to housing. Does a housing matter go to Cabinet Committee, to housing and business policy? Does it go to a decision day? Does it go to Cabinet, or indeed to scrutiny? I think for the sake of clarity and good governance, we all need to understand exactly how we're processing the various aspects of the housing group's work. And we welcome a full discussion with you about that. Housing, as we know, has a lot of detailed work, a lot of negotiations, contract issues throughout the year. And so we're hoping we can gain clarity, which doesn't seem to be clear in the report. Chair, I also question the frequency of the Housing Committee. It's indicated to be once a quarter, and I have raised this already with the portfolio holder. During 21-22, a number of housing papers were submitted outside of the normal meeting cycle, and you can check the exact number. I think we all agree housing is such an enormous budget with many contractual arrangements and a good deal of administrative detail. I therefore would ask that the frequency is reviewed to make sure we meet the multitude of contract and decisions needed by the housing team for them to be made in good time. I always feel it's better to plan ahead rather than call an emergency meeting as indicated on page 16. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for those points, and thank you for highlighting those questions you wish to have addressed. Chief Executive, do you have some comments that you want to make?
I can certainly assist, Leader. So first of all, I'd like to give members my full assurance and that of the monitoring officer that our current constitution provides a legal framework that is appropriate for our decision-making architecture. So I wish just to reiterate again that our constitution is legally correct, but it has been a long-held wish of the council, and we said we would review the constitution once it had bedded in, and that has taken longer than we anticipated. And not one to dwell on the past, but we had to pause that work because we have dealt with 30 months of a pandemic, and given the constitution is legal, then that was not a priority item. However, as indicated in this report, and had the monitoring officer been here, she would be able to raise it for you, it is an important consideration how the cabinet committees, which are executive committees, interface with our policy and scrutiny work. And the policy committees themselves are in fact only 2 to 3 years old. They were introduced with that new committee. And in fact, if I may, as an observer, and I support one of those committees, they work really well. They are a way in which to engage a broader range of members in policy under development, and they provide an effective support mechanism and constructive challenge to the policy development of this council. However, the introduction of the cabinet committees, the CABCOMs, means that we do need to carefully consider that. And our advice to you today, Cabinet, is that that is not something to be done lightly. We have just appointed to those policy committees. We are just recovering from the pandemic. We know that we are still facing absence and challenge and the need to regenerate and review and support our committee, our communities, and we have an effective committee structure that does that. And to address Councillor Horrell's point around frequency, we therefore not only need to consider what matter is best considered either at a policy committee or at a CABCOM, and then we have to consider whether the decision making should be made at council, cabinet, CABCOM, or a decision day. So all of that is quite a complicated path. But my understanding from your discussions today is that you wanted to immediately place a mechanism on the table that allowed this council to even more effectively engage and reach out and have conversations, as the leader has said, in a deliberative space around our 2 key projects, which are identified, to address another one of Councillor Horrell's points, as CWR and Station Approach for the Regen Committee, and to further deepen and strengthen our relationship with TACT and our tenants, and take forward work at speed with respect to our housing stock, which we know is a precious, precious service that we offer to our communities and we know is much loved. So I would say to you, Leader, that with the choice and Cabinet, the choice, we have indicated a meeting frequency of 4 for each of these committees, and no one likes to pop an extra committee in because that just upsets everybody's diary and we can't get the right people at the right place. But with the choice of decision making as Cabinet, CABCOM and Decision Day, I think you have at this moment time to accept the terms as they're written, and then when we look at the Constitution review in the autumn, which we will have to do because of this additional piece of governance, you can then reflect on the workloads that are coming through and the forward agendas that are being constructed, and whether you wish to change the frequency of this or any other Cabinet committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Executive. That was very helpful. So sort of coming back to, I mean, to me, I think the question of the relationship between the Business and Housing Policy Committee and the Cabinet Housing Committee is a relatively straightforward one, which is one is an executive decision-making forum with space for TAC to be directly involved, and the other is a scrutiny and policy committee. And those are two well-defined roles within the Council's constitution, and so personally I don't think there is a particular difficulty there. By default, we would expect Business and Housing to be, should it choose to do so, should it wish to scrutinise any of the papers going to the Housing Subcommittee, to be the scrutiny committee that does that. But one of the purposes of the policy committee was also that it starts to think more forwardly in terms of future policies that will be needed on housing, and I'd hope that it would continue to fulfil that role too. Similarly, in terms of the scope of regeneration, the intention is that we use this for to maximise we use the new committee to increase the level of involvement and debate where appropriate on major projects. And that may include ones that go beyond station approach and central Winchester regeneration, where it is appropriate, where it is believed that the executive wishes to look at where a project is in particular a particular point, and it is not of a scale or level which would require it to go to Cabinet. I'm realising that one thing we do need to clarify is the TACT nominations for the Housing Committee, and I'm wondering if Mr. Light, do you have names as to who you would expect to be your two representatives and your one deputy on the Cabinet Housing Committee? Okay, well, I'm sure we can.
Absolutely, Chair. I mean, you've always fielded somebody for us, and sometimes we need to be flexible about that. But I suspect Cabinet may invite you in a moment to indicate whether you'd like to take that seat and that you support that method of working. But we're happy to take a name in due course.
Okay. Yeah, and we can manage that separately. In terms of this item, I know that you haven't asked to speak, but if you do want to do so and make some comments about the establishment of this housing committee, then be very welcome to do so. If you'd like to come forward, David. Thank you.
TACT has always felt that we should have a separate housing cabinet, and that it would be more beneficial to understand more intact, what is going on, with the housing committee. And it'd be, if we just have a housing committee, because there are so many different aspects in the housing, so we would support this. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And knowing that TACT support the creation of this committee is frankly, it'd be a bit of a showstopper if you didn't. So I'm very pleased that you support that. Cabinet, do you have any questions about this paper? No? Do you have any points that you would want to make in terms of debate? Councillor Porter.
Thank you. I think, as our executive said, that the creation of the committees, housing, environment, etc., have actually been a very constructive way to give advice to cabinet members and to look at the upcoming policies that we're likely to change or to improve. And I wouldn't want to lose the effectiveness of those in the cabinet committee conversation. I'd just like to raise that, because I think it's something that it's done in almost an apolitical space, and I think that's really useful, and I think we should be encouraging the continuation of those.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Any other comment or debate? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Leader. Just to say that I do support the recommendations in this paper. I think it has become clear over the last number of years that, particularly on the housing front, that we do need more of that deliberative exercise that the Chief Exec talked about. So I do support the setting up of both of these committees and welcome the fact that, tacked up least, that there will be a formal committee set up around to look at all our housing interests. So happy to support the recommendations.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed, Cabinet. And I think I strongly agree with Councillor Porter's point about the importance of scrutiny and policy development. I've spent far more of my life on this council in scrutiny than I have as a member of Cabinet, and I strongly believe that it's a very, very important role that does a great deal to improve the governance of the council. And I agree also that, you know, there's no area, and particularly an area that sits on a cabinet committee, that should remain unscrutinised. David, did you want to?
Just want to say that the members on the housing after consultation will be me, David Chafe, and Reserve Lynn Mellish will be the.
Thank you very much indeed, Chief Executive. Can you add that to the recommendation? That's much appreciated, and thank you for putting those names forward. Thank you. So we have the recommendations in front of us. I won't go through all the names again, but in essence, we're being asked to agree the terms of reference for the Cabinet Committee Housing, Cabinet Committee Regeneration, agree the Conservative, Liberal Democrat and TACT backbench members, agree the Cabinet members on each of the committees as talked earlier. Cabinet, can we agree the paper on that basis? Thank you very much indeed. The next item, dying boredom here, are we, is station approach. So station approach is now in the lucky position of having a cabinet committee to keep an eye on it, which was not the case when we last talked about it. This is a very important project for our city and our district, the wider area. It's a real opportunity to improve things in that area of our city, but it is a project that needs to be rebooted, because since we last ran the station approach project, a lot has changed. COVID has happened and had a huge impact on work patterns and travel patterns. We see it with traffic, we see it with trains. The time of day has changed, the type of journeys that people are making are changing. The movement strategy which one of the engines for it was actually the previous station approach project, has changed our understanding not only of how people currently get around the city, but how we want them to get around the city, where we want parking, how we're going to manage it. Big changes versus what we've had in the past. And we have this new opportunity that has emerged of talking to Network Rail and other partners, take a wider view than we were able to before in terms of how the whole area works, and try and create a coherent approach to the entire area that isn't just limited to city council land, but also looks at the use of railway land as well. So if we get this right, it's a really big opportunity. It can help us with our green travel agenda. and connect the station, the city and the wider area better. It can support the new and emerging ways of working and living in our city. And it can do so in a way that respects the city and all of the things that are so special about it. What I also wanted to do with this project is start it in a new way. We're deliberately laying out the project outline now, laying out right at the start of the progress of the project, even ahead of the engagement program starting, what the shape of the project looks like, how we're intending to run it over time, and starting with a strong program of listening to make sure we've heard people's views and we understand what's important to them in the area, and we understand their reaction to the proposed development principles that we're putting forward. And indeed, that's something that I hope the paper captures and does justice to, that our strong belief that this is going to succeed because we will work closely with local people, with local businesses, with other stakeholders to make it succeed. There was a very productive and positive and generally supportive discussion of this project at the Scrutiny Committee. They raised some issues about how widely we can communicate it, clarifying some of the questions that we put forward in there, and looking at further opportunities to engage above and beyond those in the original paper. And I'd like to thank officers who have also, in addition to quickly providing a minute extract that lays out the situation on station approach, also have produced a paper that lays out the answers to those questions on station approach. So that is greatly appreciated. I know that there are members of the public who wish to make deputations on this, and I know that there are also councillors who wish to ask questions about it. I'd like to start then by asking Imogen Dawson if she would like to come forward and say a few words about the project and her views on it.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all councillors. First, I'll start to reiterate the main points I raised at the Scrutiny Committee last week, including those from near neighbours who were unable to attend that meeting. I have to say as a caveat, having just quickly read the supplementary material, some of the questions and the issues I raised have probably already been answered, but just in case they haven't, I'll continue. All right, the update refers to a situation post-pandemic with a new normal pattern of work, everyday life and travel, on which research and evaluation of data will form the foundations for the development proposals. However, the situation now, and possibly for years to come, is far from normal, a period of huge instability here and across the world, which is affecting our patterns of life. COVID, the cost of living crisis, inflation, rising fuel costs, debt, the increasing effects of climate change, and of course the war in Ukraine. Given all these factors, I would urge the Council to hit the pause button now, as even data being collected this year will not be fit for purpose, as it won't reflect the new normal. I also raised the following issues. Get the PNR proposed for the north of Winchester up and running before making decisions about the existing Cattle Market and Worthy Lane car parks. But please note, whilst swathes of tarmac make hotspots in city centres in heat waves and in storms or in the winter, they also stop the excess water being absorbed into the ground. Then liaise with Hampshire County Council to sort out the continuing problems, particularly around the Carfax junction for through traffic and also routing traffic around the city centre. Together with Hampshire, put together an integrated transport plan for discussion with bus and railway companies, without which the net zero target will not be reached. And then how is the council going to manage and phase major projects, possibly with the Regeneration Committee, with Silver Hill, possible building on the site of the old recreation centre, River Park and Station Approach? a neighbour asked, is the city going to become a huge building site for the next decade? What emerged later at Scrutiny Committee discussion was the fact that there was uncertainty about the timing, scheduling and resolution of all these issues. The outline for the project currently looks like a giant jigsaw puzzle with many pieces missing. I've skipped my paragraph on consultation, except to say I think that the radius should be a mile, not half a mile, because the people of Abbots Barton and Hyde and up to Park Road who walk that mile to come into town with buggies or because they want to get the exercise or they're going just for a little shop, they're the ones who are also going to be affected. And they could be sort of leapfrogged by the people in the middle with the people in the district. That's all I have to say on that. I also suggested that labelling of the station approach project simply as a transport hub was not an accurate description of the sites involved. Other speakers last week talked about concepts of place and context for the project. The area is not a homogeneous whole, but splits into different sections, dictated by the location of land owned by the council. People live, work and shop in the area closest to the railway station around Gladstone Street. Others travel through it to other destinations, often on foot or by bike. People also at Station Hill enjoy walking up to the station with its lovely leafy mature trees, with the Hampshire Record Office and the old Victorian pub, now, which was the registry office, much loved by locals. The area now, the Cattle Market and Worthy Lane car parks, is flanked by the Hyde Conservation Area, which is almost entirely residential, excuse me, and includes Victorian houses on Worthy Lane. People from Hyde generally walk across the car parks to access the supermarket, schools and colleges beyond Andover Road. Others from beyond Andover Road walk back across that car park to get to the River Park. Not only are the people who are walking down Worthy Lane from Abbots Barton and Hyde going to reach the railway centre, but they also access the shop near the Carfax Junction. In the local plan, there was once the idea to make Worthy Lane a priority area for pedestrians. Planning such a major project includes analysis of harms versus benefits of building on land which could be used as a green lung for the city, with areas for people to relax or exercise outside. Given the need for homes to be built for the future, if anything should be built in this area, it should be for houses and flats, not shops and offices. There should be a balance appropriate to the different areas within the Station Approach project to incorporate green space and housing accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imogen. Yeah, that was given us lots to think about, and we will discuss that later in the meeting.
Oh.
Thank you, Leader and Cabinet. I just really wanted to say I'm a very strong supporter of the development of Station Approach, but I'm pleading with you to learn from the mistakes of the past. And there is a vision, and you have an incredible amount of expert knowledge on our doorstep that's not yet been tapped into. I'm speaking on behalf of Design Engine, with whom I have no interests at all, financially or conflict of interest. But as a previous client of theirs, I've worked on some outstanding buildings. They ran in the competition and put months and months of work into passionately caring about this. They're a world-class architect on our doorstep that really do understand the site. They've analysed it, and they have a real vision. But because of the ridiculous non-disclosure agreement in the previous competition, they've never been able to share that vision or present it to the members, and the officers denied them any opportunity. They spent hours, well, they spent weeks and weeks trying to persuade the previous officers running it that the brief was wrong and that there was a much better way to do it. There is a vision there that is that's you could say oven ready, if I'm forgiven to make that job. But I do plead you, please learn from that. Design Engine were very badly treated by the previous, in the previous competition. They probably did something between £250,000 and £350,000 worth of design work for a comparatively small local firm. and I think they got paid less than 12 or 15,000 for it. Meanwhile, the lawyers who wrote the NDA were paid 120,000. It's disgraceful, really. But that's in the past. It's all happened. But there is a fantastic view of how we can get this right. And I just encourage you to listen to some experts on your doorstep who care as much as I do about the future of the project and the future of Winchester. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. And thank you to both you and Imogen for your input. And I think you've highlighted a couple of things, the combination of the two together, which shows that, firstly, this is a complicated project. It is not a uniform site, and we will not treat it that way. And different parts are used differently. One of the things that is different about the way that we are running this project this time compared to previous times is, for example, we are intensely aware of the linkage between the North Park and Ride and the provision of car parking in the short term in Worthy Lane and the cattle market. And I also fully take your point that whereas obviously the railway station is a transport hub, that the whole site is not, although we must never lose sight of the station at the heart of it, but also not lose sight of the things that people value about it. And like you, I think the green hill leading up to the station is a very fine feature that we need to make sure that we respect and in our thinking. But I think the point that you touched on, that you did touch on, that I think is an important one, is that yes, we face a great deal of uncertainty, but as an example, the need to make progress on environmental issues and green travel is not something that we can hang around on. You know, we do need to transition from a world where large amounts of city centre space are taken up with impervious tarmac car parks, and redesign our cities in a way that still ensure that we have, you know, a healthy visitor economy that is a place that is easy to get to, but that we move towards it being a place that's easy to get to, pleasant to get to, on foot, by bicycle, by train, by bus, by public transport, via low carbon means of travel. And that is very much something that is one of the drivers of the urgency that we have in wanting to move ahead, while recognising that it will not be something that all gets done in a hurry because of these interdependencies that you rightly highlighted, most obviously with the management of traffic coming in from the north of the city. I know that we have two councillors that wish to speak on this issue. The first, I think, to put his name in, was Councillor Wallace. So I don't know if you would like to come forward and ask your questions or make your comment.
Thank you, Chair. So Station Approach and the Central Winchester Regeneration Project represent fantastic opportunities for Winchester to position itself as a green city. Greening needs to be at the heart of the Station Approach development, both with the site development and with the transport solutions that you were just talking about. On transport, data shows that up to 60% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the Winchester district are currently produced by transport. And we know, it's stated in the Hampshire LTP4, national policies on moving to zero emissions vehicles won't get us far enough quickly enough. And a 10% reduction in car use in Hampshire is required between 2019 and 2030. In fact, due to delays in starting this reduction, it's likely to be more than this now. Amongst other findings, recent surveys on the Winchester movement strategy highlighted the desire of local residents to move for more walking and safe cycling opportunities. Station Approach is right at the heart of Winchester, in a great location for walking and cycling. Overall, therefore, Station Approach represents a great opportunity for eliminating car usage and using sustainable transport as the transport solution. On the site development, we obviously need to be driving towards minimising the whole life carbon impact of the project. We need to look for opportunities for minimising the carbon impact from the site development, using leading standards for carbon reduction, and also on we need to be focused on minimising the ongoing carbon cost. So there should be no fossil fuels based heating systems, and the development needs to use best practice on installation and so on to minimise ongoing heating demand. To this end, I would recommend that as the project moves forward and as part of the proposed development process, and I know we're not at that part yet, but the council should be asking for suppliers to provide the carbon impact of their proposals. That might need some preparation work to make sure that happens. All I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wallace. And I also have Councillor Reid to make a deputation.
Don't like it right in front of me. Leader, thank you very much for the opportunity once again to speak at Cabinet. We welcome the restart of the Station Approach project. As the council-owned land in this area, we need a better use than it is now being delivered, to be delivered the objects of the council's strategy. When this project was started 7 years ago, the strategic objective could be summarised as increase the amount of Grade A office space available to Winchester to fill the very clear gap in the property market, to improve the gateway to the city by delivering a well-designed and appropriate buildings that drew people in to make a better use of Winchester, to provide a more affordable housing to make it easier for those that worked in Winchester to be able to afford to live in Winchester, to reduce the distance that residents of Winchester had to travel to work or business by providing more employment sites nearer where they reside, where residents work. By investing in Winchester, ensuring that the council covered the cost of its investment while also improving the built environment of Winchester. While this paper indicates the loose connection between the strategic object and the council's objectives, it is not clear what has actually changed. You did give a brief outline of what you felt had changed. Of course, it was down to COVID. A lot of things are these days. We were pleased when John East confirmed that the recent brief that these same strategic objects are still valid for this latest version of the project. I would welcome confirmation from the Cabinet that this is the administration's understanding, and if it is not, what are the strategic objects of this project? Assuming that Mr. East was speaking accurately, could you explain what you expect the public consultation to tell you that previous public consultations did not? The many stakeholders that were involved in numerous consultation events came forward with many different views and proposals, some of which are incorporated in the previous plans and some of which were not. As a strategic objective of the council has the strategic objectives of the council have not fundamentally changed, do you think that asking the same stakeholders for the same questions again will come forward with different answers? Or are you hoping that they will come forward with the correct answers this time? Mr. East also told us that he was not able to share the strategic objectives of the rail companies with us, apart from the common desire to make the station a more attractive place to use. I doubt that any semi-commercial organisation will invest much money to make the station more attractive. So can you now confirm the comparable objectives does not does the council share with its major partners in this venture? And a final comment, Chair, that the supplementary paper which was issued for this morning's meeting came at a very late hour. One must question as to this item going to scrutiny so late in the day that members have not really had a chance to observe and take into account exactly what this paper is saying for this morning's meeting. I think a little bit more time between the two would have been more helpful. Thank you once again for listening to me.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Reid. And I think it's interesting to have the two deputations, one from the new councillor, Councillor Wallace, who raised a whole bunch of issues that frankly were not seriously addressed in the original scheme, which was one of the reasons why I opposed it and one of the reasons why it crashed, burned, failed and was rejected by council. The truth is that a lot has changed versus 7 years ago. The parking assumptions that were made at the time belong in the bin and will stay in the bin from my perspective. And that was one of the reasons why we ended up with such an enormous, the original phase one scheme, so not the one that we looked at in 2019, but the one before that was rejected. It was rejected because, as has been touched on by Mr. Higgins, there were a set of assumptions within it that were profoundly inimical to producing a good design for this city. But it was, in particular, the environmental issues, the lack of weight placed upon the green environment, the lack of weight placed on sustainable travel, the lack of weight placed upon the climate emergency that led to that project failing in the way that it did, and what is one of the reasons why, firstly, it needed to be rebooted versus the seven year ago version once, and why we're looking again. And I think I laid out very clearly how the situation is different from even 2019. But the fact is, and I was exchanging emails last night with cross-country trains talking about why their train patterns are different, how their trains are being used differently. Similarly, we have meetings regularly with South West Rail to understand how their train patterns are differently, and the usage patterns are differently, commuting patterns are different, work patterns are different. And those of us who live in the city see that very clearly day to day. The way offices are used is different. And we need to make sure that any new project that we take on takes that fully into account. And I think the point that I think it's very important, and it's certainly in a meeting that I've already scheduled, and I'm looking forward to, the meeting with Design Engine, in order to properly understand their views on the city, a city they care about and have delivered a whole series of astonishingly brilliant buildings that have made our city a better place. If they are telling us there were problems with the way that project was scoped 7 years ago, then that is something I take extremely seriously. And I'm very much looking forward to meeting them and learning from them how we will be able to do a better job in the future, because I do not think that rehashing what happened in the past will be adequate. And I do not think, as somebody who's been a ward councillor for the Station Approach area and a county councillor for most of the life of that project, that we have done a good enough job in the past in understanding the different ways that it's used, the different needs that we have. One obvious example why we need a joined up approach is the whole question of buses. So the thinking on buses, the way we think about buses in the city has moved forward dramatically versus where we were 8 years ago. It wasn't even thought about within the project 7 years ago, and it didn't feature enough in the project that was put on hold in 2019. It's a very clear example of where we will need to think differently and be thinking about the future in terms of how this project works. Anyway, Cabinet, do you have any questions on this paper?
Yes, Chairman, I take Imogen Dawson's point about the need to support those people who live near the city, who are effectively living in a 15-minute neighbourhood or a 20-minute neighbourhood. I think that's a very important point. I note what was said in the scrutiny committee, and I'd like us to look again at how far out we take that consultation. The simplest way to do that is to make sure that everybody knows about this, because we know that people use the station, as you said, as a transport hub as well, and people from much further away come to visit that and come to use that transport hub. And in many ways, they want to use Park and Ride for those transport hubs, not just the Northern Park and Ride, but all of them. And we want to make sure that it works for everybody that are choosing not to take their car right into the city. Because from an air quality point of view, we need to continue to pursue a high quality of air for the whole of the city centre, as well as all the residents in the district. So I just wanted to raise the fact that we need to make sure that consultation isn't just for the absolute centre part of the city. I note that we've already taken the consultations out to different hubs, but there are many people that don't feel themselves part of those hubs, but live between those places. The Abbott Spartans of this world, and moving out from there.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. And I think there's almost a point here, which is maybe that just drawing circles as to decide where we need to consult is probably not the way to do it. And we need to be thinking about routes as well.
I think the point I was made about the 15-minute or 20-minute neighbourhood is perhaps to think about that circle too. I think that's relevant.
That's a sort of isochrons. I don't know if Mr. East or Mrs. Taylor have any comments on the question of consultation or any of the other issues that have been raised that they would like to clarify.
Just if I start by talking about the consultation, of course, to remind Cabinet that survey is not, and distributing the newsletter is not the sole means of consultation. It is one of many, many types of consultation, which I'll ask Ms. Taylor to outline for yourselves. So I think we just need to just look at it within that context. What we are seeking to do, and indeed you're seeing from the addendum, we've taken on board a lot of the comments of the Scrutiny Committee, including adding additional measures for consultation and engagement, is to capture as wide a range of responses as we can, but also in the way which is likely to be most effective, recognising that if we just go back to your specific point and that of Ms. Dawson, that actually the wider one goes out in terms of things like surveys, and bearing in mind we do have to take into account cost measures and cost versus effectiveness. So effectively the advice we've been given is that the further afield we get, probably the less likelihood there will be of effectively people submitting responses, and the cost, dare I say, it goes up. And as I said, we have a number of means which I'll just ask Ms. Taylor to just outline for you in terms of capturing the views of people who are slightly wider afield rather than those who have a near to the site. So, Emma, if I could just ask you to say a little bit more on that.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so as Mr. East outlined, there's a number of tools in the bag, if you like, in terms of being able to reach far and wide as possible across the district, but also to people that visit Winchester as well. So one of the aims is for a website that will be set up for the launch of the engagement, and that will sort of be the portal for the one truth, if you like, which will set out the engagement process. It will set out frequently asked questions. It will be updated as we go along, and there'll be also a free phone number for people that want to ask any questions, and an email if they want to get in touch with us as well. In addition to that, there's a social media strategy which has been particularly helpful on a number of regeneration projects in the means that a lot of people use the mobile now for engaging. So that will go out over the whole of the campaign with a number of adverts that keep popping up, and that will target people that are going through Winchester or have got links to Winchester. They'll get pop-ups on the social media from that. In terms of briefings, we're arranging a number of briefings with key stakeholders in the area to make sure that they're sort of informed on the process, and that they inform us as well in terms of the needs of their residents and their stakeholders. And that will be a mechanism for them to also get the message out to a wider group of people, and particularly people that we might not have reached in the past. There's also the sort of the more informal interactions where people want to talk face to face. So in September we'll be doing some pop-up events where people can come along and chat to us about the project, and they can take a survey away if they don't want to do it then, and there'll be QR codes that are advertised around the station that people can click on as they're going to their train or as they're coming through the area. So there's also a number of publications that the council has in terms of Your Voice, Your Council, Our Winchester, so we can get messages out like that, and the parishes as well. And we've taken a review of some of the things that came out of scrutiny, so we'll get some copies of surveys down to the parish offices so people can up there, and I'll be in contact with the parish clerk so that they can get the information out on their notice boards and websites as well. So there's a whole raft of engagement methods that we're doing. Obviously, if there's anything else that people can think of, then please do let me know, and we can have a look at that if that's possible.
I'm confident that we are engaging in every possible way. I think it's just about making sure that we do take notice. If we're working towards a 15-minute neighbourhood, we should be conscious of that. But I'm sure that we've got it covered.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Thank you for your question. Thank you, Ms. Taylor and Mr. East, for your sort of outlining of the consultation. I think the one thought that we may want to just adjust is that we do think about the corridors and in terms of where people come from to use that area, and that may mean that it's not an exact circle round, but that we flex it in directions where we know people are heading towards that station area. An obvious example would be that sort of the Stockbridge Road. Anybody living up along that road automatically heads towards the station in terms of how they get in access the city. So we'll need to make sure that area, for example, is fully covered. Are there any other questions? Councillor Power.
Thank you, Leader. Given that we are looking at the potential for a transport hub, would it also be prudent to have a pop-up at the bus station? Should that be thought about? And I'm very glad to see the answers to the points raised by scrutiny. However, on page 3, provide further clarity for residents around the reasons for consultation. Could we please set the expectation as to when the results will be published and where they will be found? I think we've all spent time on consultations that appear to disappear into a black hole. But if we communicate that we're going to serve up the results, I think that would be useful. Thank you, Leader.
Happy to obviously commit to doing that, and obviously we will certainly consider whether there is intended to be a pop-up within the high street itself, so not just in station, but whether we should also position that at the bus station as well.
Possibly a conversation which might meet even more of the people who might be interested in the bus question would be to see what we can do to get something on the buses themselves. So that I think it could be a conversation to have, both Park and Ride and the regular bus network that's coming anywhere into Winchester, I think that would be relevant. Any other questions from Cabinet? Any debate? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Yes, I am very happy to support the recommendations in this paper. Station approach, of course, is a hugely important project for us as a council, but also for the city and the district as a whole. And it has a huge opportunity here to provide a sort of mixed use development. We know we do need grade A offices in the city itself. We also know that we need more affordable homes. I know one of the residents talked about green open space as well. And we also need small start-up spaces for businesses. A number of the speakers talked about what is different this time. And of course, the big difference is the fact that LCR, Network Rail's land owners, have come to us and also said they're interested in looking at the pieces of land that they own too. And that opens up all kinds of opportunities, I believe, for looking at the site as a whole. So a lot has changed in the last 3 years. As people have said, we've had a pandemic, people's work patterns have completely changed, and we do see that as a resident of the city. The trains are having to reschedule their operation and look at their operation and their train scheduling on a constant basis to fit in with people's changing lifestyles and work patterns. So I do think now is the time to start to reboot this project and see what comes out of all the research that we'll be carrying out in the next couple of months. It's all going to happen pretty quickly. So I'm very happy to support this, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of the consultation and all the various rafts of evidence that any project going forward will be based on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yes, I was slightly concerned to hear that it would be proposed that we should wait for normality to return. Because as they say, history is just one damned event after another. And I don't think there is going to be a normality, sort of nostalgia. But I think it would be perfectly possible to design new buildings which are robust and reusable in various ways. And you can think of examples here, you know, like the Staple Hall proposed as a museum, or further afield, old market buildings being used as offices, cafes and so on, like the Floral Hall in London. So I think not to design a very over-specialised buildings that can't be reused. And hopefully we'll be able to cope with the future as it turns up in ways which we can't possibly imagine at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Leader. I don't think we've addressed Ms. Dawson's point about the multiple projects going on in Winchester at River Park, Station Approach and Central Winchester. I think we do recognise, as Councillor Gordon-Smith says, we are in a fast-changing environment, and all of those projects will be subject to external events. We have to work together with all of those factors. We are looking at phasing. We are allowing for adjustment of what is delivered, but we do want to move forward with this, and I think this is a very sound set of proposals. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Well, thank you, colleagues, for all your input. I thought the point by Councillor Gordon-Smith about the need for robust and reusable buildings was a good one. You know, our medieval Guildhall, admittedly, I believe we knocked it down and turned it into what we now call the old Guildhall, and is now a bank. You know, we at various points it was also the City Museum and the City Library, and we've used all kinds of buildings in all kinds of ways over time, and indeed the site itself has what was a pub and is now then a hotel and then a registry office, and who knows what happens to it next. So, but I think your point is well made, and it's a good way of addressing the point made by Ms. Dawson about that we need to think about the uncertainty that we face and make sure that we're, you know, not building things that look hideously out of date 10 years after we've built them and no longer are usable in any way. Thank you, everybody, for all the various points you've made. Highlighted that this is an important project, it's a complex project, it has particularly important environmental implications that need to be thought through in terms of transport, in terms of the green environment, in terms of the carbon impact of the buildings. We have interdependencies we need to manage, but we also have lessons that we can learn from the past, learning from what went wrong in the past, and getting an insight from people who were also using the insights that were gained in the past and making sure we properly reflect upon them and use them to inform our project. So I've been reassured that by Ms. Taylor and Mr. East that, you know, we are going to be looking to be as inclusive as possible in terms of our engagement, but we are also intending to go out and actively listen to experts, stakeholders, and make sure we get that depth of opinion that goes above and beyond what we would be able to achieve through a conventional survey process, and using a range of methods to ensure as much input as possible will be helpful for that. I'm gratified that there is general support both for the direction that we're taking and the decision to restart this project from all sides, from the public, from stakeholders, and therefore, Cabinet, I would like to ask you to agree the recommendations in front of you so that we can move ahead with this very exciting project that I think has enormous potential to do really good things for our city. Cabinet, do you agree with that?
Agreed.
So just very quickly, Chair, just to remind you that in terms of the, as you will see on the addendum report, we're recommending 2 changes to what was in the original Cabinet report. Firstly, recommendation 2, the study area, we have clarified the map. So that should replace the map currently shown in section 11.7 with the new map contained in the addendum. Secondly, in terms of recommendation 5, we are proposing to extend the consultation period and therefore replacing what was outlined in recommendation 5 with a new set of dates which are to commence consultation on the 1st of August 2022 and run it to the 23rd of October 2022.
Thank you very much indeed. Those are a very helpful reminder. So Cabinet, with the adjustment, so the original recommendations and paper as adjusted through the addendum, which is extending the consultation period and clarifying also the study area for the map, so replacing the study area in 11.7 with a revised map. Cabinet, on the basis of those 2 changes, are you agreed to the recommendations in front of you? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the so thank you, Mr. East and Ms. Taylor, for your input on that and for all your work to get the paper to this point and ready for approval, and particularly also for your work in adjusting the recommendations and providing a response to the Scrutiny Committee's proposals. The next item on the agenda is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the investment plan proposal. Councillor Thompson, I believe you are introducing it.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Members will be aware that the government has allocated Winchester £1 million from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund to be spent over a 3-year period. In order to access this investment fund, we need to jump through a number of hoops, one of which is to set out in broad terms how we intend to spend the money between the fund's 3 priorities, which are community and place, supporting jobs and businesses, and people and skills. This paper does just that and asks Cabinet to note the list of potential projects and authorise the use of £20,000 for preparatory work to develop the investment plan ready to be submitted to government, which is by the end of this month. So the deadline's coming up pretty soon. As with all these funds, as I've just said, there's a very tight deadline, but in developing this list, we have consulted widely with the City Centre Partnership, Winchester Bid, parishes via the parish liaison meeting, an email which went to all members, as well as the offer of a briefing to both our MPs. And one of those MPs has taken the opportunity of that briefing. In addition, I'm in the process of setting up meetings with Whiteley and all our market towns to discuss what plans they might have which could fit within the parameters of this fund. The available funds will be split into 3 tranches, with the bulk of the money coming in year 3. The yearly funding allocation across the 3 years is set out on the table on page 58. Of course, this amount of money, whilst extremely welcome, could be spent many times over. And as indicated on page 60 of the report, after our initial engagement, projects that have been brought forward total more than 3.5 million. So in order to achieve consideration to all these projects and others, we will need a governance structure to deal with this. And it is proposed that we set up a partnership board to take this further and ensure that projects are brought forward across the district. I welcome the fact that we will receive this money, and I'm extremely pleased that the fund's priorities fit very much in line with our own. Of course, it is worth mentioning that whatever projects go forward, they will have to take account of our overarching priority of the climate emergency. And I believe our green economic development strategy will play a large role in deciding on determining those projects. In closing, I welcome this paper and would like to thank officers for all their work in putting this together in such a short time frame, as well as carrying out all the necessary engagement, which has been very helpful and has contributed enormously to this paper. In the room, we have Mr. Gostelow and another member of the team. I wonder whether you'd like to come to the table in case there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Thompson. I believe, Councillor Horrell, you have a question to ask on this particular paper.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to speak again this morning, and thank you for the helpful paper today listing the indicative projects by investment priority. It's clearly complicated to meet the government guidance, rephasing and revenue and capital, and this has been a helpful paper to help us understand that. I'm very conscious that the major projects and regeneration projects, some of which we've mentioned this morning, are primarily focused on the City of Winchester. And as we know, the Winchester City Council is the district and is more than just the city. I'm hopeful that the Shared Prosperity Fund gives us an excellent opportunity to prioritise outside of the city, in particular the market towns, improving our local green spaces, and actually to get some things done. I'd like to just mention 1 or 2 of the areas where I'm hoping that we can focus. E1, where we talk about improvements to town centres and high streets, we mentioned the city centre, but maybe our focus could be more on the market towns that are indicated there. E3, the creation of and improvements to local green spaces. I think it's a great opportunity to highlight the parish council projects that are mentioned in the suggestions and actually bring some of those forward on a broader geography. On E17, the development of promotion of visitor economy. The district has a huge food and beverage industry that's developing, and I think huge amount of focus on that would be really encouraging for many of those businesses. Many are small and would really love the focus that we might be able to bring to them, and maybe just a further allocation of funds, more than 2%, would help them. The other element that I'm very conscious of is skills. It's a hugely important area in terms of our economy and the growth that we might be able to generate in the business world locally. And I'm wondering whether 16% is sufficient in that area, or whether there are others, projects that came forward that we might be able to support, accepting, of course, that you've had more offers than you have funds for. I see money recommended for strategy writing in E14, and I just wonder whether at this point we turn much of this money into immediate deliverables rather than another strategy, given we've had quite a lot of that developed in the recent past. I know outcomes and specifics are not required until the next stage of the process, but it would be helpful at this stage to understand just what we believe we will deliver against E19, for example. Some of the details are limited and not entirely obvious to those less involved in the detail. And Chair, just one other thought. I'm surprised to see a lack of members identified in the partnership board. I see 2 cabinet members, quite appropriately, but I wondered whether other councillors could be included. And can I suggest that the shadow representatives for the 2 portfolios mentioned might be included too? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Councillor Thompson, do you have any?
Thank you, Councillor Horrell, for your comments. As I set out in my earlier comments, it is my desire that projects are delivered throughout the district and not just in the city centre. And I don't disagree with you about strategy writing. I do want to see us actually having things that we can visibly see and point to as a lasting legacy of this fund. So I'm very keen that we do that. Partnership board, I'll take that away and give a bit of consideration to that. I don't know whether officers have any comments to make. Andrew?
Just on Councillor Horrell's point about the partnership board, the paper outlined an indicative group, and as Councillor Horrell may recall, with the Green Economic Development Strategy Advisory Board, that is cross-party and includes a broad spectrum of contributors, and I'm sure we would want to do the same for this as well.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, any other comment? No? Cabinet, any questions? Councillor Power.
Thank you, Leader. I'm very pleased to see it's going to be spread across the district. We really do want to see that. I found it very useful with the European money we had, or leader funding, I think it was, that so many projects outside of Winchester City were flagged as such, and I wondered if we could make sure these deliverables are flagged as the prospect. It just makes it known we're delivering. Any
response to that? Any other questions? Debate. Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yes, I think being responsible for service quality and struggling to get the public loos maintained, I would have said this area and this country does need skilled apprenticeship schemes. And, you know, compared with Germany, we really do suffer of taking pride in really good workmanship. And I think anything we can do to encourage that would be extremely useful, not only for fixing the public toilets, but, you know, for increasing skilled manufacturing, helping provide skills for manufacturing jobs and so on.
Thank you. And Councillor Porter.
I think Councillor Gordon-Smith's taken my point away almost exactly. I'm an absolute advocate of apprenticeship schemes, and they tend to be used at higher level, but we definitely want to be using them at all levels, right from the bottom to the top of the apprenticeship possibilities. The other point I was going to raise is that in any project there's an element of full cost recovery. Full cost recovery includes creating the strategy in the first place. This is an awful lot of money to be spent, and I think it's important that we do it, money that's necessary to do it. But my main point was about the apprenticeships. I fully agree with
Thank you. And I don't know, Councillor Thompson, do you have any reaction to that in terms of the sort of skills and apprenticeships? Is that something we can adjust or flex?
Well, we can certainly look at that. And I know that a number of members actually did raise this point, one of them sitting right next to me, regarding the provision of new skills, particularly in the green industries, where we're struggling to find people to do our own work, let alone any work at, you know, for private householders. So it is something we could certainly look at and take forward.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to you and Juan and Mr. Costello for all your work in getting the papers done. Thank you also for the opportunity. Thank you. I think some of the comments that have been made and the opportunities to adjust and flex as we move through the process in terms of getting input from wider stakeholders. And this particular point about apprenticeships is definitely worth consideration. We have a set of recommendations in front of us that give us the space to do that. The next stage is a particularly defined application form, which is in a slightly different format to what we have in front of us today, a regular cabinet paper. But we are effectively devolving the necessary decision-making and consultation and engagement in order to do the work, to have the whole proposal put together. So those are the 6 recommendations in front of us. Cabinet, do you agree with the proposal? Good, thank you very much indeed. The next paper in front of us is the General Fund Outturn paper, which will be introduced by Councillor Power, and then I have 2 speakers, Councillor Wallace and Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Leader. I shall introduce this very briefly because Mrs. Keys is in the room should we have any technical questions. We did have a surplus last year of 1.633 million. We intend to use a substantial amount of that to set aside 2 million against inflationary pressures. These are coming at us from all directions, as indeed they are for households. The work to assess those will not be complete until the October, and then the amount in that fund will be reviewed and other decisions will be made. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace, would you like to come and make your comments.
Thank you, Leader. Right. Just a couple of questions on this one. Garden waste bins. Can the council confirm whether the intent is still for the garden waste bin service to be cost neutral, i.e. that the council is not seeking to make a profit from this service? If so, given the higher than anticipated take-up of the service, what are the implications for the price of the garden waste service? Second question was around the eastern part of Park and Ride. The report states that creation of an additional Park and Ride spaces to the east of the city centre, the Voltex site, will reduce traffic in the city and support the city's council's carbon neutrality pledges. Please, can you provide the calculations to show how these statements have been reached, as data shows that development of previous Park and Ride sites has not reduced traffic in Winchester city centre? Thank you.
Howard, do you want to respond to those questions now?
Well, we haven't really looked at the garden waste service. We know that everything the council does is under pressure. We are undertaking budgetary review with all heads of service, and we're working through that at the moment. I'm not going to prejudge any decisions from that operation, Leader. Regarding the Park and Ride, I'm afraid that's well beyond my expertise.
I don't know, Richard, if you have any comments on those two issues. Only one of them.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the first point about the garden waste bin service, the current approach is to achieve a cost neutral position. So that's the policy that was approved as part of the budget when we set this 2 years ago. We have achieved a higher level of subscription than we had first projected, and as a result of that, Cabinet considered, approved the introduction of a discount in the current year. So that obviously will have an impact. So we will be assessing the impact of that discount and on the overall cost of service coming forward. It will be for Cabinet to decide whether how that will impact on future charging.
Thank you. And is it also within the scope of us trying to understand the pressure of inflation that we're facing at the moment? Because my understanding is that all our contracts do have an inflationary element within them. And so presumably we will be facing cost pressure, which is something we also need to factor into future pricing.
The waste contract is subject to a CPI increase each year. I think it's February, so it will depend on what the inflation is in February of 23, will it impact on the cost of that service. We didn't increase the charge for the garden waste bin, so at the moment, clearly the inflationary increase will have an impact on the overall cost of service and what the income from the garden bins will contribute towards. So yeah, we'll know more about that later, depending on the inflation level. Sorry, and on the second point around the calculations, I don't have those to hand, but I'm happy to go back to officers and ask for a clarification around that statement.
Yeah, I think that would be a question probably for Councillor Learning or for the officers working on the City of Winchester movement strategy. I think it's very important that when we look at that, we look at it as a system, because what it enables us to do is to decommission car parking in the centre, knowing that we continue to maintain our visitor numbers and the health of our local economy. But that is definitely something that needs to be looked at as a systematic approach. And I think also something that needs to be looked at in terms of evidence of impact rather than looking at modelling, since it is now there. And we perhaps need to ask officers for a view in terms of what impact it has had. Councillor Reid, you wish to... Councillor Reid doesn't wish to because he's not here. Councillor Horrell, are you in a position to
Chair, Councillor Reid apologises. He's actually not very well and has had to leave the meeting, so we'll forego our opportunity because we did ask questions at scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm very sorry to hear that, and I hope he feels better soon. Any questions from Cabinet in terms of this outturn? Oh, Councillor Porter.
I suppose it's a comment really, but I'll leave it as a comment. Going to debate?
Debate.
Thank you. We've no idea of what inflation will be and what the costs will be and what the local government agreements will be. But I'm just going to make the point as well. We've talked very much about how we want to invest in net zero vehicles for waste. And we want to make sure that we can deal with the cost of the increased take-up of green waste as well. It costs money to recycle. We need to make sure we're dealing with it appropriately as well. So I think that the question that was raised about the green waste is relevant, but there are lots of factors that affect what makes a cost-neutral service. I just wanted to also raise the fact that we know we have many services in the, I'm sure this will take this up, and I'm just going to raise planning, because planning is a service which at the moment is coping well with the requirements that is placed upon it, but we don't know really how the pressure of planning will take off again once the phosphates issue has been dealt with. And we do know that that will put a lot of pressure back on the planning service, as there's a rush of applications following this year of rather stagnant service, really. So I think there's a lot that we need to consider in our budget to review before we make a decision about what we do with the 1.6 million.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Any other comment or debate? I would, there isn't anybody else say something. I would like to recap on your point about inflation. We know that this is going to have a big impact, both on the cost of operation of the council across all our services, but also it's having an impact on businesses and it's having an impact on residents, and it is likely to have an impact on the demand for our services as well. You know, if people, for example, come under housing pressure as a result of the bills that they're facing, then that is something that will cause extra cost and complexity for us. And I think we also need to recognise that our ambitions for decarbonisation are not all free. You know, if it was free to fully decarbonise, then everybody would be doing it. But they're not. And it is something that will be factored into our medium-term financial strategy, our ongoing investment programme, as a big priority. As you touched on, one of the questions we need to ask is, how do we fund decarbonisation of our waste collection service? Because again, doing that in a zero carbon way will involve capital investment, will involve new vehicles. And that is a journey that we have put money in this year's budget to start, but that is just the start, and we need to make sure that we are able to fund the entire journey. So I think what's in here about establishing an inflation reserve is a good one. There is a lot of uncertainty about the future of the income that we will get from government through the taxation system. There is uncertainty about the costs that we're going to face. You know, we're not in a position to be increasing our charges, our tax base, for example, in line with inflation, at least as regulations currently stand. And so what's proposed here, I think, is very plausible, but very sensible response to the uncertain times ahead. Let's not forget that, you know, the county council, which faces even greater inflationary pressures than we do, is expressing extreme concern for its long-term financial viability. And we have seen other councils in other places, well, some other councils in some other places have ended up effectively going bankrupt and being run from central government. We are fortunate, thanks to the very hard work of officers, that we are nowhere near that position. Have a sound financial base going forward, and this paper reflects that. So very grateful for all the work that's been done to prepare this paper and to manage the finances outlined within it, and make sure that we continue on a sound financial footing, which is a huge priority for this administration. Councillor Power, any other comments to make to the paper before we move to a vote?
No, thank you, Leader. I'm grateful for the support of Cabinet in this matter.
Well, thank you very much indeed for all your work as well in getting this paper ready and brought forward. So, Cabinet, do we agree with the proposals outlined in the General Fund Outward Turn 21-22 paper?
Agreed.
Good, thank you. The next paper is the Housing Revenue Account Outturn paper. This would normally be introduced by Councillor Ferguson, but she is not here, so I will say a few words to introduce it to you all. So this paper lays out the final outturn position for 21-22 in relation to services funded through the Housing Revenue Account, which is, in technical terms, it's the account that that looks after our council housing. It's a very important part of what we do. And indeed, earlier in the meeting, we established a special committee to make sure that it gets the attention that it merits. In terms of revenue, we finished the year with a surplus on the housing revenue account of 1.6 million. The paper highlights why that is and is recommending that the surplus is carried forward to support the set-up costs of the proposed housing company. It also recommends that the tenancy support programme that was set up 2 years ago to help tenants who may be struggling to sustain their tenancies be extended into a third year. I mean, particularly given the real challenges that so many residents and tenants in particular are facing due to the cost of living crisis, higher heating and food costs, this additional support is absolutely vital. Again, with respect to the Housing Capital Programme, a number of variances are set out in the report. And while the headline figures suggest a significant underspend, there are a number of large items in that relating to mainly phasing of capital programs. It's a fairly common picture. The budget is put in to make sure that we're able to do everything if everything runs at the fastest possible timing, but that doesn't always happen, particularly as we know the challenges in the construction industry at the moment. So the biggest relates to the unavoidable delay in starting the Winnell New Homes scheme, which was caused by some recosting and a delay in utility providers in providing the necessary way leaves. But the development is now well underway and due for completion in November next year. I think Richard and Gilly are in the position to answer any questions that may have. But first, we do have some public representation and also representation from councillors. So if we could start with the light from TACT. I believe you have some comments on this paper.
The TACT support group has looked at the HRA outturn report, and some parts we need clarification on. And we thought it'd be best to go to full TACT. And so Richard Botham is going to come to TACT next week to present the HRA outturn report to full TACT, because we think that we need to get their comments and what they understand of the report before we can make any comment ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and I will look forward to hearing back, Mr. Botham, the results of that conversation. Mr. Tate, you wish to make a deputation.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. And regrettably, I couldn't be here at the beginning of the meeting, so I'm hoping that your announcement of a new committee may actually be what I'm requesting. So as some of you may be aware, I take a particular interest in the provision and maintenance of inclusive and affordable housing. The council plays a fundamental role here as both the provider of over 5,000 council-owned dwellings, but also as a contributor to policies relating to affordable housing. In former years, there was always one specific committee that dealt with virtually all the relevant issues relating to the council's housing stock. But some while ago, the committee structure was altered, so there are now a number of different committees dealing with council housing. I never understood why it was considered a better option to stand away from the old Cabinet Housing Committee, and I would argue strongly that there is great benefit in reverting back to the existing committee. It always strikes me as odd that we have a committee dealing specifically with homes on Barton Farm, yet we don't have the equivalent for our huge council-owned estate. I had heard on the grapevine that Cabinet were considering the reintroduction of the Cabinet Housing Committee, and I hope that's the announcement that you may have made. Getting housing right, both for those looking to buy, but also those who want to rent, is hugely important for both maintaining stable communities, but also for tackling climate change. We've got to get back to basics with what housing is for, so people can actually live where they work and they have their recreation time. So I'm hoping from those positive facial expressions that what I think is right, and I know a lot of members think is right, is something that you also think is right. So I welcome that if that's the case. So thank you very much for the opportunity to address the committee. And great to see you in that position, Councillor.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Tate. And I do indeed have good news for you. Earlier in the meeting, we did re-establish the Cabinet Committee for Housing and look forward to you also continuing to demonstrate your well-known passion for affordable housing and an inclusive district at that meeting as well. Thank you. We have two councillors wishing to speak on this paper. Councillor Wallace, you were the first to apply. You're the first to speak.
Thank you, Chair. The council budgeted £1 million for the Climate Emergency Capital Programme in 2020-21 and only spent 240k. Council budgeted 1.6 million in 2021-22 and only spent 38k. Now the proposal is to reduce spend in 2022-23 from 1.5 million to 600k. The purpose of this climate emergency programme is to improve the energy efficiency of council homes. Delays to this programme mean that some of the most vulnerable members of our society are being hit with astronomical energy bills that could have been avoided. What can be done to reverse this trend and to accelerate the transition to more energy efficient properties? My first question. Additionally, it's likely that the £15 million allocated for the climate emergency programme will be insufficient to retrofit all the council housing stock, so additional funding needs to be identified. Both major repairs and improvements and conversions underspent significantly against their budgets. Major repairs underspent by 2 million to the original budget in each of the last 2 years. Improvements and conversions by about 500k. What can we do to ensure that these underspends are used to accelerate energy efficiency improvements to the housing stock, particularly at this time of the cost of living crisis?
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Mr. Botham, do you have a response to that question?
Chair, yes, thank you. The progress with the retrofit programme, we have previously reported that the reasons for where that programme is where it is. At the decision day in June, Councillor Ferguson supported or approved some decisions in relation to addressing procurement issues to bring forward that programme. Effectively, we agreed a programme last year to focus on void properties. We had the potential conflict for having multiple contractors in a property to address, and addressing that did take much of the year. In a way, I mean, I was not wishing to use that as a reason to explain the delays in the programme. In a way, it's fortuitous that it was, because if we'd have commenced with the plans as we have proposed earlier in the year, I think we would be undoing some of what we have learned over the last year. Some of the technical solutions about retrofitting that we do differently now than we would have done a year ago, and that's just part of engaging with the sector. And we had quite a simplistic approach around internal retrofit, fabric first retrofit to properties, and the importance around the monitoring, prior monitoring, and accreditation of contractors, and all those things that we've now addressed, which we wouldn't have, which weren't in place last year. It's, you know, I'm not using an excuse for delays in the programme, but certainly it does mean we're now in a position to move forward with a expensive and a better technical solution. Councillor Wallace did identify that one of the major challenges of that programme, in that 15 million would be wholly insufficient to fully retrofit our stock. We projected that at nearer £200 million. We will be making a bid to the WAVE Social Housing Decarbonization Fund, which I think deadline for that is September, October this year. So officers are in the process at the moment of preparing a bid to that programme as the first stage of addressing that gap between our current programme and what we would need to address the whole stuff. With regard to the forecast for the current year, that's around officers taking a pragmatic approach to what they think can be delivered in void properties over the course between now and the end of the year. So that's an assessment of the types of properties coming forward, the ones that will be suitable for the fabric first retrofit, and what we have now determined is that probably won't include flats, and so much of our stock is flats. So we're looking at a different solution for our flatted stock, and that will be some form of external insulation rather than a better solution. But obviously, you know, we know from the experiences in the sector in recent years that that has to be very, very cautiously, but we need some full assurance that any solution there is a solution. So that isn't spending less on the programme, it's just we'll commit less in this current year. We still have the £15 million allocated as the 10-year programme, and the solution for how we fast-track that work from now will need to come forward, and Councillor Ferguson is already working with officers to determine the action plan for delivering that.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Botham, for that answer. And we sadly live in a world where the ability to bid effectively is a vital part of effective administration in local government. The ability to bid to central government or central government arm's length bodies, and I'm very reassured to hear that we're doing the work to make sure that we are able to bid to central government to top up the 15 million that we've identified and ensure that we have a programme for leveraging in and bringing in the extra funding that we need to achieve the scale of change that I know that we're all keen to see. Councillor Horrell, you've also asked a question, make a deputation.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to speak again this morning. And I did ask an extensive list of questions at scrutiny about the HRA outturn reports, so don't intend to repeat those today. As you know, the Conservative group is ordinarily supportive of the HRA budget and objectives, and we try to be as encouraging as possible of the initiatives that are laid out. Which is why this morning it is with some sadness that I raised a significant number of underspends in the HRA outturn report this time. Ordinarily, we'd be grateful for savings on a budget forecast, but in this case, I'm afraid not. I think we're all agreed we would have rather spent our fire safety provision, our climate emergency retrofit monies, we would have improved our estates, we would have completed our major repairs work, and our sewage treatment maintenance budget would have been spent. We all agree that these are important budgets, that's why they're on the list. We do understand that the lack of staff and materials shortages have impacted some areas of our work. But the HRA is an area of the Council's work that needs us to stay ahead of the game, and the underspends this time are significant and rather too consistent across the piece. My question is, are we sufficiently focused on the resources that we need to deliver against our objectives? Have we got enough staff to do the work that we need? Do we have enough contractors to help us with that? Are we sufficiently focused on the HRA? The new build programme variance of 17 million is huge. And although I know we have already caught up on some of the projects, which we discussed at scrutiny, we cannot allow this to continue if we are actually serious about completing the 1,000 new affordable homes target. I looked at the pipeline this week with Mr. Palmer, and it's simply too short. We all know that projects fall by the wayside and that we need to ensure that we refill that pipeline with new ideas about where we can generate new affordable homes in the district. I do thank the officers for their efforts throughout the year and their support. And I know that they do care absolutely about the tenants and the communities that we create and support the district. But I would ask the Cabinet to consider whether we've given our best efforts as a council to fulfilling all of our tenants' needs against the very important objectives that we have set and indeed which we all support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Horrell. Mr. Botham, some questions about the pipeline and some other issues there.
As Councillor Horrell said, we had a good debate at the Scrutiny Committee, and I know the Scrutiny Committee determined that there weren't any issues to bring to Cabinet attention, save the general comment that Councillor raised. A couple of points on delivery against programme. Yes, we had experienced some difficulties in recruiting to key positions in the team, which has now been resolved. We now have full activity on programmes like the Estate Improvement Programme. We're back up to full resource in the New Homes team. So a number of those pressures caused earlier in the year have been addressed. In saying that, also just to highlight the delivery against the New Homes Programme. So Councillor Todger already mentioned made reference to the Winnell scheme. So that scheme has now progressed well. That variance reported against the Winnell scheme has now all been committed, and we're further on with that programme. A couple of other points on that programme as well. There is a line in that programme which we refer to as the small sites and unallocated sum, which allows us flexibility in a year to bring forward a scheme of short notice or to buy land or any other decision that would support delivery. And in last year, the decision was taken that resource be used to support the development of Whiteley. That money was committed in the year, so that's over £4 million that we spent on that scheme in Whiteley. Because of the nature of that scheme, it's a payment on account. It's an upfront payment in effect, so we have to treat that differently in the account. So that's treated as an advance payment and accounted for in 22-23. So the money's been spent, it's been committed, but we have to account for it this year. So it shows as an underspend on the outturn. So that's another reason for that. And then a more positive explanation is in relation to the scheme at the Valley. So big development that we opened this year came in significantly under budget. So that's not non-delivery, that's delivery within budget and actually an improved position. So whilst certainly there has been some difficulties bringing schemes forward, there are some other significant contributing factors to the size of that variance reported in the paper. With regard to pipeline, Councillor Ferguson is in discussions with the team directly at the moment around how we can bring forward schemes more quickly and how we can add clarity to the future programme. And much of that depends on discussions with other stakeholders who have either land holdings or Homes England and that sort of thing, which will support some of those schemes. Albeit we are aware of other issues that will test our delivery there. So we have the phosphates and nitrates issue, which in a way we're in a better position than some developers in that we're well placed to it. We have some mitigation that we can take ourselves in relation to our own sewage treatment works, which will give some credits for that. But we still got to work that. We've got to work that through. But certainly that one of the first meetings of the new Cabinet Housing Committee, I'm sure, will include an update on that programme, and that will allow proper scrutiny and focus on that programme delivery as well, which I'm sure members and TACT will want to see brought to early meetings.
Thank you very much indeed. Ms Knight, do you have any comments that you'd like to make in terms of resourcing and some of the issues that were raised there by Councillor Horrell?
Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, we have, like many other teams, and I think many other councils, struggled to recruit this year, but we are, to add to that, it's also looking for a different skill base now. So with our retrofit, we are very, very blessed to have the officer that we have with us now, but she is a part-time resource. So, we do need to look at those resources growing as if we really want to deliver on the projects that we've committed to. So we are pretty much up to speed again now. It's just retaining those staff as well in the current situation. So yeah, it is challenging, and then we've got lots of big projects, but we are, as Councillor Horrell said, we are very passionate about what we do, and we are committed to wanting to deliver on our retrofit programme, our estate improvement programme, and many other programmes that we have underway.
Thank you. Cabinet, do you have any questions on the HRA outturn? Debate or comment?
Chairman, I think those of us that have had any building work done in the last year are very well aware of the increasing costs and the lack of skills available to the building industry. Local builders will not give a material quote, a raw materials quote in their pricing that's good for more than 2 or 3 weeks. The price of steel, from talking to businesses last year, has gone up by 350%. As we referred to earlier, we are in a very fluid environment as regard all pressures, not just on staff, but also on raw materials. I praise the cautious approach of officers in these matters. It was right to test out the retrofit measures before we sailed into that with all sails flying. And we are in a very difficult time, and the delays are not a surprise to me. And I think we're all in the same boat, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Any other comments or debate? Well, first of all, can I thank officers for all their hard work that is reflected in this paper. And as others have mentioned, during very challenging times. It's a challenging time, particularly in terms of dealing anything to do with construction. But also we have these new sort of left field things coming in, such as the phosphates issue and other things. And again, actually, the imaginative work that's going on to see how we can use our own facilities to address that is much welcomed. It's also useful to hear how some of the accounting changes actually end up making quite large differences in terms of how the numbers look. And this is an absolute classic, presumably pre-committing up front in Whiteley and then only releasing it, only appearing in the accounts as the buildings get built. And similarly, you will never hear any condemnation for underspending and coming in under cost and budget in the work that was done in the valley, which is also greatly appreciated. And similarly, the point made about the really very large sum relating to Winnell Flats, where the viability question, but also presumably the challenges with SSE and the like, were a significant contributor. And actually, I was in a meeting yesterday talking about something completely different, EV charging, and there is a huge issue at the moment with the electricity companies and their ability to support construction, their ability to support EV charging, to support the level of change that we're all needing to see. I think they've been sitting there trousering money for a bit too long and have forgotten that they're actually meant to deliver a service at times. But anyway, this is a really helpful paper. I appreciate its candor. I appreciate the ambition it lays out for what we're going to do in the future. I share the commitments that so many have expressed in terms of whatever we can do to accelerate our retrofit program and our wider environmental agenda as part of our overall commitment to tackling the climate emergency. But I also greatly appreciate and respect the fact that we are taking the time to get it right. Make sure that when we do retrofit, we do in a way that is long-term sustainable, that does genuinely work, genuinely reduces bills, and does so in a cost-effective way. So the work that is being done to make sure that we have a really well-founded programme for that vital work is greatly appreciated. So, Cabinet, we have a set of recommendations, including the extension of the current tenancy support programme, something we haven't talked about in great length, but something that's incredibly important. Mr. Botham, you have a comment.
Sorry, Chair, just noted on, whilst all the wording of the recommendations is correct, it would appear that recommendation 4 has lost a return. So it's recommendation 3 should end after paragraph 2.3, and recommendation 4 then a separate recommendation.
Sorry, I'm confused. Page 100, where does... Oh, I see what's happened. Okay. So, a clarification so that everybody is in the same place. On page 100, paragraph 4 has ended up as part of paragraph 3. So, the second sentence should read, funded by the drawdown of the remaining unallocated funding for welfare support of 88,000, together with the underspend of £144,006 from 21-22 as detailed in paragraph 2.3. That is the end of recommendation 3, and then new recommendation 4 notes the housing capital programme outturn for major works and new build as detailed in paragraphs 11.5 to 11.8 and appendices 3 and 4. Just so everybody's clear about what we're agreeing. So we have 6 recommendations. Cabinet, are we agreed? Thank you very much indeed. The next item is the Q4 monitoring programme. This refers back to Q4, so January to March this year, seems like a long time ago. It has had thorough scrutiny, both by the Scrutiny Committee and by the performance panel, who have raised a series of questions which they've asked officers to address, but have not brought anything forward that asking this committee to look at in particular. Obviously, since this is a paper that reports on the performance of all our areas, we all should know it well and not have any particular questions to it, particularly our own areas. I don't have any deputations on this one. So, Cabinet, there is no particular recommendation in front of us other than to note the report and endorse its contents. Does anybody have any questions that they wish to ask on top of that? Is there any debate? Right, can I ask then that you agree with the recommendation to note the progress achieved during Q4 and endorse the contents of the report. Thank you. The next item is the taxi policy review, which is due to be introduced by Councillor Porter.
And supported by Barney Appletree, who's the expert on all things tax. Yes, if you'd like to join, thank you. Just to say, to start with, that Winchester City Council takes the safety of our taxis, both the physical safety of the taxi and the taxi drivers themselves, very seriously. And this paper deals with, really, the national guidance requiring each taxi driver to have up-to-date DBS checks, which we do, but this is about improving that service even further. There's a massive job for doing DBSs for taxi drivers. We have 248 approximately. And so this paper looks at a more cost-effective, but a more practical, but also a practical way to enable our drivers to have a DBS system that works well for them, but it incurs a small additional cost, which we intend to recommend in this paper to absorb in the 22-23 year, knowing full well that our taxi drivers do not need additional costs as they're hopefully recovering from the pandemic. It also does something in a very practical way by being part of the update and borrowing service. Hopefully, the taxi drivers won't have to go through the rigours of doing a DBS check every 3 years, but also our own staff will not be involved with managing that process. There's a lot of detail in paragraph 12.9 to 12.21, and also in 12.22 it talks about further decisions to be made, which is about the frequency of policy reviews. None of these changes at the moment put an unnecessarily financial burden on the taxi drivers themselves. We're very pleased to see that. It also just touches on the CCTV conversation. DfT has looked at this, or is looking at this as well, and we have been looking at this with neighbouring districts. And if you have any questions on that, it's just we go back to Bryony to ask her the detail. But meanwhile, if you've got any other questions on the taxi drivers' DBS checks, I'm very happy to hear them. But as far as I'm concerned, this is something we needed to do. It's the DfT's national guidance, best practice guidance, and we brought it to Cabinet because it's important that people understand that this is actually the safety of our residents using public transport and our taxis, both private hire and the Hackney carriages, is of utmost importance to us.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. And I also note that this has been through the Licensing and Regulation Committee as well. Is that right? And they're supportive.
Yes.
I'm very, very pleased to hear it. Cabinet, do we have any questions on this licensing paper?
So been out to consultation, and Bryony might like to just to explain to you how that consultation.
That would be very helpful. That was a question I had actually, which is what consultation has happened on this paper, obviously outside the council, and what response have you had?
Thank you. So we sent this proposed policy review out to consultation for a month. That goes directly to all of our licensed taxi drivers, vehicle proprietors and operators. We also sent it to key stakeholders, so we sent it to all members. We sent it to the local hospitals, the local schools, the local universities, all of our neighbouring authorities. We actually only received 7 responses in total, 6 of which we believe are taxi drivers, and the other we're not sure whether it's a member of the public or someone from the council. The survey system is quite anonymous. The majority of responses were in favour of the proposals. A few respondents disagreed with some of the proposals, but didn't provide any reasons for disagreeing. But it is in the majority that they're agreed with.
Thank you, and thank you for consulting so widely. That's much appreciated.
I think it's useful to say as well, there is a taxi drivers So these things are taken up with.
Thank you for the breadth and quality of consultation you did. So debate, please. Anybody want to say anything? Councillor Power.
Chairman, this was first looked at some time ago. I believe I was on the licensing committee when we looked at it. It was very thoroughly debated, and I'm very happy to support.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Yes, that was also my impression on reading the paper. It's a very thorough, well thought through, well consulted, well engaged piece of work that also brings our standards up to the latest standards. And I'd like to thank Ms. Appletree in particular for all her work to make it happen and bring it and bring the paper to us here today, and also obviously Councillor Porter for all her work on it as well. So, Councillor Porter, do you have any last words, or are you happy that we move to?
Very pleased to make the recommendation.
Thank you very much indeed. So we're being asked to adopt the licensing policy that's laid out as an attachment. Cabinet, are we agreed? Thank you very much indeed. And on to the last item on the agenda, which is the forward plan for August. He's only looking ahead a relatively short period of time. I know that we have one thing we have discussed, and that we are keen as a cabinet to discuss, is to spend some focused time looking at our carbon programme as a whole. It is our biggest priority within the council plan. I believe we have a carbon roadmap paper coming in November, so that might be the next opportunity to do it. But it was very clear during today's meeting that it's an important cross-cutting theme. So that will be something I will talk to the Chief Executive and colleagues about, to make sure that we have an appropriate pulse of discussion on this critical priority during the course of the Cabinet year. Is there anything else that people want to comment on in terms of the forward plan? Can we take it? I can't remember if we're noting it or agreeing it, but whatever we need to do, let's do it. We're noting it. Okay. We're noting it, but the next version will have some more carbon in there. And I believe that's the last item on the agenda. So I therefore thank all the officers for their work, Chief Executive and directors for their leadership in supporting their officers to have everything ready here today. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you to Cabinet members for all your work on the papers that have been in front of us today. Thank you also to the members of the public for their deputations, and also councillors for their deputations are also greatly appreciated and help us strengthen and improve what we're doing within our plans. And on that basis, I declare the meeting